searching, referencing, and many other library and learning skills. Since June 2020, we've been producing a podcast that sounds a lot like this. It was our way of reaching out to connect with students and give them some skills help at the same time. Now we want to tell you how we did it and what we learned.
Thank you, pre-recorded, Bob. So hi, I'm Andy Connelly. This is me live. So when the first lockdown began, pretty much overnight, we had moved all our drop-ins, teachings, one-to-one support sessions, everything online. This led to kind of the whole skills development team feeling distant from the students and also kind of distance from one another. Sharing pictures of our home office setups was fun, but it wasn't the same as kind of turning to a colleague for a chat over a cup of tea. I'm sure most of you felt the same, many of you felt exactly the same. So to help us feel a bit closer to each other and to the students, we turned to that most intimate of platforms, the podcast. I sometimes think it was like radio for the 21st century. Our aim was to make a podcast that delivered skills content right into our students' ears, while also creating a sense of library community. But it was going to be a podcast made by amateurs, that's us, using whatever equipment we happened to have lying around at home. So it was always going to be a challenge, but it was one we were really excited about. Luckily for us, we had Bob. Bob already has a podcast. It's not library related, but he had the know-how to help us through the process. And we were lucky to have an enthusiastic and very adaptable team. So here is Bob to talk us through that process. And then I'll come back to talk about what worked, what we found difficult, and then what was successful. Yeah, okay, thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Andy. So we very quickly decided on the form of our podcast, which would be fairly straightforward. It's an introduction by a host from our team, contributions on skills from various colleagues, and then a closing statement, as well as some links between segments and background music. A podcast's not actually that difficult to create. If you have a smartphone with a built-in mic, you can make a podcast. But there is a difference between making a podcast and making a podcast that sounds good. We did want to move quickly, but we didn't want to throw out something that sounded amateur or unfocused or messy. So we listened to some other podcasts to understand how they sound, the quality, the feel, the tone, and so on. Software-wise, we use the audio editing software Audacity on PC to put the podcast together. Audacity is widely used by podcasters because it's fully featured, lightweight, and crucially free. Working from home, I recorded host segments with my microphone and PC and used these segments to link together contributions from others, which are largely recorded on smartphones. One advantage we had was that the university already had a podcast feed on SoundCloud that had gone through the Apple Podcast verification process. And while you don't have to do this, most podcatching software uses Apple Podcast Library as their database of podcasts. So if you want your podcast to be findable, you do need to be approved by Apple. It's important to note here that I, like many members of our team, already had experience of voice recording and editing because we produced narrated video guides as part of the skills offering. But I was doing a lot of things for the first time, compiling disparate clips, adding music beds with AutoDuck and so on. But a bit of judicious Googling was all it took to find out how to do that stuff. But there were challenges, as Andy will explain.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. If you look on our podcast stream now, you'll see since June 2020, we've released 10 episodes. We'd hoped to be up to kind of 20 or 30 by now. And a large part of the reason for being slower than planned is, well, some of the reason was that our team was being reduced in numbers for a large part of that time. There's also COVID, obviously. There's also a cyber incident that's much less exciting than it sounds. But one of the main reasons is the time it takes to create content and get the right feel for the podcast. We have a small editorial team who approaches possible contributors and comes up with ideas. But despite a lot of initial enthusiasm from our team and from the wider library, it was hard to persuade people to record themselves. It was even harder to persuade people to write their own content. And we soon realized that actually stitching together content written by different people working independently was really tricky. Sometimes impossible. So later episodes were written by one or two people, a slow process, but actually it helped us control the feel of the podcast. it's hard to get a balance between being informative and yet personal, and amusing but also be professional, because we are representing the library after all. Alongside those content issues, there were a few technical challenges to look at. So you'll see on the picture on the PowerPoint, that is me under my duvet trying to get decent sound quality. Because it's really hard when you've got different people, different recording in different environments in their homes, to get the sound consistent, to remove all those background echoes. So throwing a duvet over your head, it's a bit warm and looks a bit crazy, but actually does help. Despite those challenges, I think we're really proud of the 10 episodes we've produced, and we really hope we can produce more in the future. Okay, I'll hand back to Bob, who's going to talk about what went well.
Cheers, Andy. We did find a structure that seemed to work nicely after a bit of trial and error. We call it the A to Z of learning skills format, where we cover a single subject, such as G is for Google, in a short 6 to 7 minute episode. And that helped guide our colleagues' contributions and made it much easier to bring together disparate recordings into a whole. The host segments evolved to do more explicit linking together of concepts, and the later episodes were arguably clearer and more cohesive. The question of whether the podcast was a success isn't necessarily an easy one to answer. Listener numbers, as far as we can tell, are reasonable, given that we didn't advertise the podcast beyond what we could do on our main existing channels. Obviously, summer 2020 involved a lot of messaging to students, so those channels were already somewhat crowded. We've received some good anecdotal feedback from students and staff, actually, but we could certainly do with doing some more proactive research amongst listeners to find out more. Every member of our team did make a significant contribution to this, whether recording, producing, writing content, or otherwise. Everybody got involved, so the podcast really helped to bring us together around a new and interesting challenge. We all learned new skills and shared what we'd learned with each other. For example, I made a step-by-step podcasting manual to share some of the technical learning. And speaking of learning, Andy's going to talk a bit more about that.
Thanks, Bob. So I think one of the main things we've learned is that making a podcast can be a lot of fun. Like, I really enjoyed, and I think a lot of us really enjoyed the whole process. We've learned that generating content and editing it all together can be really time consuming. And we've also learned that making a high quality product doesn't necessarily translate into as many people using it as we'd like. Anecdotally, student response has been positive, but we still don't really know if students are finding the content useful and what they're doing with it. Without that, it's been really hard to prioritize making the podcast over the many other projects that compete for our attention. So the next kind of step is getting a better idea how the students are using it, how much they're using the podcast, so we can allow us to prioritize it over other things.
Sorry to interrupt, just 2 minutes left, guys.
Thank you. Podcast, but what, as Bob said, the podcast has connected the members of our team and the other library staff together. Hearing each other's voices and overcoming the challenges of creating the podcast together was a real bonding experience. One of our team members recently retired, and we've got a recording of her voice on the podcast. She was really good. It's really nice to be able to hear her voice and kind of remember working with her on that podcast. So while the podcast's taken a backseat at the moment, the project has given us a renewed confidence in our team's ability to move quickly on new and untested projects. And it's been really good. And finally, for me, really quite unexpectedly, we've learned that anyone can get over hating, and I really did, hating the sound of their own voice.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.
And I thought we'd just throw back to the podcast to close us out. Hello, Bob again. We hope you enjoyed that presentation. If you want to know more about creating a podcast or our work at Northumbria, then please get in touch. Finally, if you want to listen to some of our podcast episodes, find the Northumbria Skills Podcast on your favourite podcatcher. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next time.
Thanks so much, Andy and Bob, for that really interesting talk about podcasts. That was excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Now I'm going to hand over to Samantha Gillies and Olwen Pennington from Edge Hill University, and they're going to be talking about meeting new staff during a pandemic.
I'm going to share the presentation. Thank you very much. I'm Olwen Pennington and I'm presenting with Samantha Gillies today. We're both from the academic engagement team at Edge Hill University. The academic engagement team was formed about 4 years ago as a small, dedicated team to work with the academic departments at Edge Hill. We're all responsible for liaison with particular departments that we work very closely with. However, we do work together and support each other around staff development and inquiries that we may pick up for each other in absence. So we all help each other, but we do have sole responsibility for particular departments to build those relationships and work with them closely. In terms of the activity that we do, we're responsible for all the academic liaison activity for Edge Hill. So that means working very closely with our colleagues in other teams in library and learning services to get a full understanding of the support they can offer the academics, what kind of material they're making available to the academics, projects that they're undertaking, so we can work with the academic departments to maximise that and ensure that they can keep in touch with the departments that they need, the teams that they need to. So a lot of what we do is attending meetings, team meetings, programme boards. We also are the first point of contact for any queries, so again we can direct to the most appropriate place. And a key part of what we do is academic staff induction for library and learning services. And we've had that role for quite some time now. We're based in the Catalyst building, which you can see there. We sit with our colleagues from library and learning services, but we also do share that space with colleagues from student services and careers. So we've been working with academics, providing an induction to library and learning services since way before COVID. We glean the information about the new starters from an HR bulletin that we receive each month. We can then use that to send targeted emails to the new hires in the departments that we work with. And also we glean information and intelligence from our colleagues in the academic departments as well. This is really quite successful. We do get a good success rate in terms of getting to know about new academic hires, getting to work with them and email them. However, we still do find that a few we don't get to know about so quickly, and then we can obviously pick those up a bit later on. Prior to COVID, we'd always try and meet people face to face. So we'd talk to them about the support available to them from the various teams at library and learning services. We could showcase some of the information we have on the web pages for the students, so they had a better understanding about the student support available for their students. And we could also give them a tour of the library previously, and then more recently, the services available in the Catalyst building. And again, as I say, that was quite successful. We got to meet nearly all the new starters that came to Edge Hill that way. We used to have a lot of information that we gave out in print. Each team would have a little bulletin giving information about the team, about how to contact them. We'd sometimes have initiatives or training sessions that we'd promote that way on flyers, and we'd have them in a pack that we'd give out to the new starters. However, that was becoming increasingly cumbersome to keep current, and we were very conscious that it isn't a very sustainable means of distributing information. So we focused our efforts on the staff wiki. Edge Hill has a staff wiki. All departments are encouraged to use it. So we decided in our team that we would really encourage library and learning services to make full use of that wiki and really make that content current and relevant to the academic teams. So that's what we've done. So about 3 years ago, we really worked to make sure that information was really current and a good point of truth for all the services that library and learning services can offer. So much so that when we moved into Catalyst, we actually produced coasters with an image of the new building on, and also the wiki link at the bottom, which we gave out to new starters when we met them, or if we did training sessions with staff, or if we were just visiting staff in their offices, to really try and make everybody aware that that was where the gateway to all the information and support was. I'm going to hand over to Samantha now, who will talk more about how we made the pivot to meeting staff online.
Thanks, Olwen. Hi, everyone. So obviously COVID hit us and we've all had to change the way we work and live our lives. And for ourselves, for staff induction, this was no different. We were faced with challenges, as you can imagine, as Olwen touched on before. We'd gone from that face-to-face in our practice to then having to deal with, well, we're not going to be seeing these academics face to face. What can we do? So to start with, we changed our approach to our email. So whereas we had our welcome email, which would send out to academics saying, hi, welcome to Learning Services, I'm so-and-so. It'd be great if we could meet and discuss learning services and everything that we offer. It was very much a case of, hi, welcome to Learning Services. What can we do to help and support you right now for your teaching so that you're prepared for working with your students, and we will meet you, but it'll be via Teams. So we stressed that to them, that everything we did, all our communication from then on would be through Teams. Another issue we had to think about was how can our induction be valued and make impact for the academics. So the approach we adopted was when we met with the tutors, it was very much, what do you need right now, as opposed to, as Olwen touched on before, with the wiki, which we've done a lot of work on, highlighting our research support, classroom support, collections, how to use resources, so on and so forth. It was very much a case of, what are you teaching? What are your needs? What can we do to help and support you right now? Do you know about Blackboard Collaborate? Can you use Panopto? Do you know how to get up and running? And whilst this was very much the approach we had to take, it did prove beneficial because we had more of a rapport with them. We got better feedback in terms of what we could offer them in our skills. It wasn't just a case of us telling them, oh, we've got a bounty full of resources and everything's available for you. It was very much bespoke and tailored to the individual needs, which I think they did appreciate. We did have our engagement from HR in terms of spreadsheets and our new starters, but we had to be proactive in our approach. We were well aware that there were new members of staff, but we weren't getting that data through quick enough. So we were more proactive in terms of contacting our departmental administrative managers and asking for any names, anyone who started, could they just get in touch with us. So in terms of our engagement and our collaboration with other departments, that was increasing as well, which was beneficial. We also thought about our own staff development for the staff and our own training on databases. Did they need further support on reading lists so that they could get a reading list up and ready for the students, so the students have got that instantaneous information? So for ourselves as well, it was good for our own staff development to ensure that the staff were ready for using Teams, Panopto, accessibility, for example, how to use Collaborate. And this led to a development of online learning resources as well. Olwen touched on before how we would provide coasters to members of staff, which was always nice to highlight the wiki to them. But I thought it would be a good idea if we developed key resources for staff, which provided links to our key databases, our key resources, our help pages, and that would be sent to them at the end of the induction so that they had that information instantaneously and they knew exactly where to go for help and support. And that leads on with the follow-up email, as you can see there on the screen. Hopefully, it's very much just a welcome, saying thank you for attending the session. Here's the link to the wiki, so that they were ready to go. And a lot of academics I spoke with actually bookmarked that section in the toolbar so that they knew straight away where to go for that help and support. And that also generated feedback for us, so we were getting some data from them. Just thanking us for the induction, how beneficial it was, and they know exactly where to go should they need it. And that also led on to a creation of the academic staff welcome pack. Again, this was all online. This went through every section that we had on the wiki, but it was just sent to them as a link, as a PDF, and they'd be able to then open that up and find the information.
Just 2 minutes left,
Samantha. Thank you.
Yeah,
thanks, Olwen. Can go on the next slide. Okay, so New Horizons. The question is, has Microsoft Teams been a success for induction? Well, it certainly has a place with induction. It's ensured communication channels have remained open between us and academics, whilst providing that platform to demonstrate what the service offers. It's definitely given us flexibility. For example, if we've had new members of staff in St James's, which is in Manchester, for example, paramedic staff, we've been able to just meet with them straight away. We haven't had to go up to Manchester. We found, similar to online courses and conferences, more people are engaging because it is online. They've got that freedom to jump in and jump out, so we've got that flexibility. It's also led to staff development for ourselves, key themes, discussions. When we meet with a new member of staff, we have a tracker system on our spreadsheet. So we highlight who we've met, what the key theme and discussion was. So if a member of staff shown any interest in research, we then get in touch with them and say, do you know there's some staff development sessions on research? If they're interested in accessibility, we'll say, oh, do you know that we've got these sessions going on? So it's increased our engagement with the academics as well, which has been really something that's been beneficial. And then lastly, a joined up approach. I think going forward, we can think about induction in terms of how we can work with our learning technologists and the research support teams to maybe have us all coming up with one generic induction to provide with the academics, so that they're not having to meet all these different people. It's just in one place. And that's it. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Olwen and Samantha. That was a really good talk, and I think we've all learned it's been a really steep learning curve, hasn't it, over the last 18 months. So it's really good that you've found all those things to help reach the academics. Great.
Thank you.
Okay, so for our final lightning talk of this session, I'm going to now hand over to Kirsty Hemsworth and Jayne Evans from Sheffield Hallam, who are going to talk about academic boot camps.
So hi, hello there. My name's Jayne Evans and I'm here today with my colleague Kirsty Hemsworth, and yes, we're from the Skills Centre at Sheffield Hallam University, which is part of the library, and we wanted to share a new mode of delivery that we experimented with this year because it seemed to work quite well for students, so it felt like a good thing to share. So what we're going to talk about is why we set them up, how we ran the sessions, what attendance was like and the impact that we made, and what our next steps are. So I think one of the things that we'd long wanted to do was to develop some modes of delivery for students that engage with higher numbers. We have a lovely space in the library at Hallam, but a very small classroom. So often our workshops were pretty much limited to 12 students. Occasionally we got able to use a space in lecture theatres, but that was fairly rare for us. So we were often running very small workshops. So of course, with our move very quickly onto online delivery, like everyone else, we discovered that suddenly we had this much larger capacity to deliver, and uptake immediately was very positive from students, and our numbers grew quite rapidly. So we wanted to look at starting to experiment, and we particularly wanted to look at our offer for foundation year students and level 4 students, because we found that much of our previous offer had been taken up by final year and postgraduate students, and this gave us a great opportunity to experiment with some online delivery at large scale, and also to develop something that was a bit more incremental rather than one-off workshops. We'd had a trial run with something that we called our writing gym, which was for postgraduate students over 6 weeks. That was really successful, but we wanted to build upon that and work collaboratively with other colleagues, particularly the librarian team at the university, because as others have said, we were feeling quite isolated and we were missing our colleagues as well. So that was another kind of thing that we wanted to consider, how we could work collaboratively on a new project. So we've got three key things that we wanted to achieve with our boot camps. We wanted to have some continuity. So the boot camps were designed to run over 4 weeks, and they had a theme reflecting the academic cycle. Like I said, we wanted to work in collaboration with other teams who were perhaps working on digital skills, our learning and teaching librarians with information skills, and maths and stats tutors. So we really wanted these to be collaborative sessions. And we also wanted to try and build in some community. We were very conscious that our students were looking for connection, and we felt that this was an opportunity to provide that. So we ran 2 boot camps, one in February and then one in March and April, an assignment boot camp and then a dissertation boot camp. They were delivered via Zoom, led by 2 presenters, but also a moderator team, because one of the things that I think we were really pleasantly surprised by was the interaction in the chat from students was enormous, and it was brilliant, and it was very, very moving actually to see how much the students wanted to connect with us and with each other at that time. And so we had to bring in other staff as well to make sure that we could keep on top of that chat. We kept our cameras on, we recorded all the sessions, and we shared the sessions. And the way that we tried to build community in between sessions was through Padlet boards with mixed success. But we know that that's kind of really just a starting point for us. So yes, that's kind of the format of the sessions.
Sorry, my slides are very slow. Here we go. So we thought that maybe it would be interesting to show you who attended the sessions. We did feel, based on the numbers, that these were really successful. We saw far greater numbers of students than we ever would in our classrooms. As Jayne mentioned, our classrooms are very tiny. We're limited to about 10 or 12 students. So moving online really gave us an opportunity to kind of scale up our delivery. So the assignment bootcamp, we had a total of 539 students attended. That's kind of bums on seats. It amounted to 271 unique students, and you can see the 4 session titles down the right hand side there and the numbers that attended each. So our most popular session actually was the reading and research session. It was lovely to see that one be the most popular because that was delivered in collaboration with our subject librarian colleagues. So we got that sense of community not only from a big group of students, but I think from having a bigger team delivering that session. Really interesting though was the spread of levels of study of the students that attended. Our comms had very much focused on that foundation year level 4 audience because we wanted this to be very introductory to the key skills of assignment writing. But actually we saw a lot of level 5 students who I think after a year of study that had been disrupted were quite anxious about their first assessed assignments. But we also saw that trend of postgraduate students who attend our other sessions. They kind of turned out in force again for our boot camp. So we had 79 students coming along that were postgrad students. If we look at that in a little bit more detail, in terms of how that breaks down into demographics, 36% of attendees did come from a BME background. This compares to about 16% of our population of students at Hallam as a whole. So we did have a really diverse kind of cohort of students attending this first boot camp, and particularly as well those international students. Around a fifth of our attendees were international students, and I think that is where most of those postgraduate students are from. I think that's where the connection is there between the numbers. I'll mention the gender in a moment, but just have a look at that pie chart because you'll see it repeats itself in a moment when we look at the dissertation boot camps. So in our dissertation boot camp, perhaps with the momentum that we'd built with the first round, we did see more students. So 615 students attended this boot camp. Really in big numbers was our first session. So we ran this March to April, and we did have the dilemma of different dissertation deadlines across various different departments. So I think that very first session, timing wise, caught a larger audience because a lot of students were still ahead of their deadline and submission. I think as well, we really tried with the dissertation bootcamp to use that success-based language. We wanted to make clear that this was about really stretching yourself to get that higher grade rather than this being more of an introductory level overview of dissertation. So writing a first class final year project, we actually had 239 students in the Zoom room that day. So it was really sort of, there's a lot of hustle and bustle, but it was a really nice busy session, lots of comments in the chat. You can see here from the demographics, of course, we attracted more level 6 students here. It was most relevant to those still picking up some of those second years and those postgrad students as well. I mentioned the pie chart on the previous example, and you'll see here, even though we saw more students in our dissertation bootcamp, we stubbornly still remained at about an 80-20 split of our female students to male students. And this is something that we see pretty much across the board in our sessions. We see many more female students across all of our different delivery formats, whether that has been online, whether it was face-to-face in previous years, or things like one-to-one appointments. I don't know if that's the same at other institutions that delegates are here from today. It's something that Jayne's going to pick up on in a moment. It's something that we are definitely working on and focusing on as we go forward for the next couple of years. In terms of the demographics, again, you'll see here kind of slightly less diverse cohort, I think because it was mostly our level 6 students who tend to be young home undergraduate students. But 26 of the students that attended had declared a disability. That compares to about 17% of our population at Hallam University. So that was really heartening to see, because I think one of our worries moving online was obviously keeping our practice inclusive, and it was heartening to see that these students were still finding the sessions accessible. So I think the data probably only tells one story. We have got a good amount of qualitative feedback that we're currently working through as well. And we're in the final stages. We're just putting the finishing touches to a really lovely student voice video, and we'll be sharing that on our website soon. Just our students talking about the impact this had on their confidence and their grades. I think that's a really powerful video, and it's going to be good for us to share that in the year ahead. So I'll just pass on to Jayne to just bring us to the final slide.
Yeah, that just 2 minutes left, ladies. Okay.
Thanks, Liz.
So yes, our next steps are we want to continue to run the boot camps. We're going to split them over the 2 semesters. So the assignment boot camp will be in semester 1, and we can bring the dissertation boot camp a little bit earlier in semester 2. We want to develop our opportunities for peer support. We've been running some deep focus sessions where staff collaboratively work together over the summer. They've been really successful, so we're going to introduce those to run alongside the boot camps as well, alongside developing some asynchronous resources and community. As Kirsty mentioned, we are working currently on a project where we've just applied for some funding to do some co-production with male students at Hallam to look at what we can do to kind of create an offer that is of interest to our male student community, and we want to further develop the collaborative work with particularly the stats service. I think they're really keen to work with us. We're happy to chat with others either today or in the future about the boot camp, so definitely keep in touch. We'd like that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, that was great. Thanks very much, Jayne and Kirsty. That was really insightful, and it's interesting to see that the females engage more than the males. So that's interesting. Okay, right. So, do we have any questions for any of our brilliant presenters this afternoon? If so, just raise your hand, and we'll get the questions going. Right, we've got a question from, a few questions. Right, from Andy.
Hi, I just wondering for Hallam Skills, 2 people from Hallam Skills, so I've lost your names. I was wondering how you advertise those sessions, because it's something that we really struggle with, to kind of get the word out to students about the sessions we run, and because I'm from a skills team as well in Northumbria. It's just how you kind of got the advertising, how you got the word out there about it.
I think there was a real a lot of support from academics. I think at that time they equally were looking for what they could do to offer enhanced support from their students, and I would say that probably that was where we picked up a lot, that we went out via the heads of teaching and learning, who then cascaded that to course leaders, etc. And I think the academics probably sold it for us. I don't know if you feel similarly. There is an all student digest that goes out every week, and we promoted it very much through that, and the university were keen again to promote opportunities for students at that particular time.
I'd agree. I think particularly in the assignment bootcamp, where we saw that kind of large group of second year students coming along, I think that was very much driven by the academics. I think we've been hearing from academics this year just kind of concerns about that cohort as a group of students who have had 2 years now disrupted going into their final year. So they were particularly keen, I think, to highlight that we were offering this and it could enhance what they'd got on their courses. I think in terms of the number of postgrad students, one thing that's worked well for us is just those targeted emails. and students get a lot of emails, of course, and there is a bit of a risk of overwhelming them. But I think the postgrad students we've seen this year in particular, we've seen a lot of students attending more than one session. And it does feel that being online, we've just been able to build a bit of rapport and a bit of a relationship with those students in a way we haven't previously if they weren't able to attend sessions and it was a bit more difficult for them to get in. So I do think from that, those students, it was more like a loyalty thing. I think they saw this new thing, they were kind of grabbing any opportunity they could to engage. And so the postgrad students, it was more that direct kind of emailing and reaching out to them as a group.
That's great, thank you.
And we've got a question from Gemma.
Hello, I'm just going to check there isn't more than one Gemma, because there usually is. I'm going to assume it's me.
It's you, Gemma. Sorry, Gemma Wayne, yes.
This question is for Kirsty and Jayne as well. Your programme sounds amazing and it was such a good presentation, so thank you so much. I'm from the Academic Skills Development team at Newcastle. I was just wondering about the term bootcamp, which it just seems really at odds with the way that the way that you present it, you're so inclusive and so kind of welcoming. I can absolutely see why you get so much student engagement, but I just wondered if it just makes me think of like crash diets in the military, and I just wondered how that went. Maybe it's just me, and I wondered how well that went down with the students. Like clearly, they didn't seem to be upset by it at all.
Do we confess, Kirsty, while we went?
Let's confess. Let's be open and honest, Jayne.
This is probably a female attempt to attract male students. I think we kind of like it was just a bit of a sort of like, let's change some of the language, and as you can see, it didn't work. So yeah, but that was we tried to use imagery, success language, which we'd read in the literature that was very important, and that kind of achieving, a bit of competition. That was very deliberate on our part. It didn't work, as you can see, but that was what we were thinking. Yeah. And that was we read that in the literature, that was the kind of route to go, wasn't it, Kirsty?
That's it. Yeah, we were sort of focused on productivity, mastery, that really like kind of positive language that we tried to instill in them. But yeah, little bit of a failed attempt, I think, in terms of trying to bring in more of those male students. Sorry, Gemma, I interrupted you.
No, it's fine. Sorry, this is bizarre because you can't see my face. I am nodding enthusiastically because I have experienced exactly the same thing with the gender division, and it makes absolute sense that language like bootcamp, you can see why that might be sort of more appealing. But no, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay, and there's another question, a raised hand from Karen Backhouse.
Oh, hi. This is a question for Andy and Bob about your podcast. I was just wondering what was the optimal length of your podcast, or at least was there a point at which you went, okay, we can't be any longer than? And also, did you find yourself, in sort of the transference of creating videos in terms of online skills help, find yourself sort of describing things because it's a podcast and it's not a visual element?
I think in terms of length, for me anyway, it was having listened to a lot of podcasts. I was well aware that to kind of get someone to listen for any length of time, you need a certain kind of podcast, something you build a relationship with, like a host that you can build a relationship with. And we knew that given the kind of content we were producing, anything more than 6, 7, maybe 8 minutes was probably going to be too long to keep people's interest. I don't know what you felt, Bob. That was kind of my thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that because of the nature of the content, and even early on, we tended to focus on scripted content, just for for ease of sticking to the topic and so forth, and because we weren't doing it via conversation, it was mostly people on their own. The scripted content, I think, you tend to want to keep that a little bit shorter because it doesn't have the kind of easy flow of conversation and so on. So I think that absolutely, when we kind of naturally fell into this kind of feeling that the kind of sub 10-minute length felt about right once we started to put the pieces together.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I don't think there are any other questions, but if you do have any, just raise your hand. We've got a few more minutes to spare, so if you do want to ask anything, fire away, raise your hand.
So just to address the second part of that question on the podcast about describing the content, I think we very much had to start from scratch in terms of how we presented the content. For me anyway, we very much didn't try and recreate video content or anything else. We very much tried to create a podcast.
Right.
So it was more about, we weren't trying to be, so for example, and this is a bad example, but say we weren't trying to describe someone how to check a book out, because we knew that just wouldn't come across, like describing the stages as taking a book out. Right. So we were more about telling stories.
It was broader and more top level.
Sorry, Bob?
I was just going to say it was broader and kind of more top level rather than a detailed. It wasn't intended to be kind of instructional on a granular level, but to kind of have that, to, as you say, Andy, to tell a story, to contain a kind of a narrative of some kind about a topic, rather than to be a tutorial or a step by step.
To get the listener interested in the topic and sneak a bit of learning in there as well, rather than focus on the learning, I guess.
Yeah, you're engaging with someone rather than Thank you. That answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
New content.
Yeah, unfortunately, yes.
Okay, so I don't think there are any other raised hands. So I just wanted to thank all the presenters so much for the really enlightening talks during this session this afternoon. And just wanted to remind you that we've got a gold sponsor presentation, which is starting at 4:15. So and that's from Adam Matthew Digital. So that's from 4:15 to 4:30. So if you wanted to go along to that, just follow the links in the timetable. After that, we've got a quiz, so a bit of a social event, and that's at 4:30. And if you wanted to look at the Chat and Kate channel as well, you'd be very welcome to put some pictures of Kate's in there. But if there's no other queries or raised hands, then I hope you are enjoying this conference, and hopefully see a lot of you tomorrow. Okay, bye for now.